So there's a lot of opinions on the Soviet T-34 tank, and they are very different, going from this was the best tank during World War II to this is the worst piece of crap the battlefield has ever seen, after the T-26 of course. But one thing that is often mentioned is that the T-34 was reliable. Now, reliability can mean many things, but in regards to the T-34, it was seen as reliable because of its simple and rugged design, which allowed it to perform well in harsh conditions. This is what many people say who cover the history of the T-34 only from a very surface level perspective. It's not completely wrong and baseless, but it's not 100% correct either. And that's why I wanted to make this video about some quite embarrassing problems which the T-34 had in the beginning to give you a different perspective. So hello and welcome and enjoy this video. The beginning of the war in 1941 was plagued by some initial problems of the T-34, because as you know, tanks are prone to teething issues. Typical teething issues with tanks are engine issues, which was also the case for the early T-34s. But the consequences of this problem were hard. An example of this would be the Soviet 8th Mechanized Corps under the leadership of General Dmitry Ryabyshev, who marched with their T-34s from the Drohobych region in Ukraine through Lvov to the Brody area during the tank battle in Dubno, where they were supposed to fight against the German 15th and 46th Motorized Corps, which were advancing in Dubno. This march from Drohobych to Dubno would be almost 500 kilometers long. The 8th Mechanized Corps numbered more than 30,000 soldiers, 932 tanks, with many T-34s among them, and 172 armored cars. Long story short, General Ryabyshev's 8th Mechanized Corps lost almost half of their equipment before they even reached the front lines because of breakdowns and a lack of fuel. Quoted in the book T-34 in Action, A. Drabkin wrote in his book I Fought in the T-34 something that confirms this occurrence. He wrote, "For the T-34 tanks in 1941, a 500-kilometer march would have been almost fatal. In June 1941, the 8th Mechanized Corps under the command of D.I. Ryabyshev, after such a march from the places of permanent deployment to the Dubno region, lost almost half of its equipment on the way due to breakdowns." Also quoted in the book T-34 in Action was a man whose name was A.V. Botnar, I couldn't find his full name, who was in combat during 1941 and 1942, said that from the point of view of operating them, the T-34s, the German armored machines were almost perfect. They broke down less often. For the Germans, covering 200 kilometers was nothing, but with T-34s, something would have been lost, something would have broken down. The technological equipment of their machines was better, the combat gear was worse. Another problem of the T-34s were their caterpillars, also known as tracks or something similar. The caterpillars on the T-34s were the most frequently repaired part of the T-34. They had to be repaired so often that crews even took some spare tracks into combat. Now you might think that's the most normal thing, right? Caterpillars can break during combat. I mean, yeah, that's correct. But that itself is not the problem. The problem with the T-34 caterpillars was that, according to A.V. Marievsky, they used to break apart even if no shell or bullet hit them. Earth, which would get stuck between the road wheels, combined with the strain from taking a simple turn, would lead to the caterpillar just giving up and breaking. Another problem with the caterpillars was the fact that they were extremely loud. Quoted in the book T-34 in Action, Rodkin explained, "A T-34 didn't only roar with its engines, it also clanged with its caterpillars. If a T-34 was approaching, you would hear its pillars clanging first and then the engine. The point is, the jacks of the tracks were supposed to fit exactly in between the rollers on the driving wheel, which clutched them in rotation. But when a pillar had stretched out and got worn and the distance between the teeth had increased, the teeth beat on the rollers and produced a characteristic sound." End of quote. This problem could not be solved because wartime shortages meant that rubber tires could not be fitted on the road wheels to decrease the noise. But as far as I researched further into the book, this is not entirely true. Rodkin's unit received T-34s from factories in Stalingrad, which used internal shock absorbers instead of rubber tires. These types of T-34s were being produced long before there were actual rubber tire shortages, which would be in the autumn of 1941. That means they had the chance to fix this issue, but for some reason they didn't. In late 1942, the USSR sent two T-34s from the front line to America, specifically to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, which is a US Army facility in Maryland in the United States of America. This was done so that American engineers could, as the report said, familiarize themselves with the T-34, and the results were not very satisfying. For example, the Americans found that there was a problem with the hull. It was leaky. More specifically, water would go inside the tank through the lower hull during water crossings and through the upper hull during heavy rain. This led to electrical systems and even ammunition getting disabled. They also found that the suspension of the T-34 was quite horrible. According to the report, evaluation of the T-34 and KV tanks by engineers of the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Americans tested the Christie's suspension a long time ago and unconditionally rejected it. They came to this conclusion for the T-34 from testing their own American tanks, which had very low quality steel on the springs and quickly fatigued and reduced ground clearance. In regards to the tracks of the T-34, they were deemed too light, which according to their viewpoint could be easily damaged and made inoperable by small caliber and mortar rounds. The pins were also made of poor quality steel, which meant that they would break often. Now, let me present to you the worst thing the Americans found on the T-34. It was so bad they described it as criminal and said that only a saboteur could have created something like this. The air cleaners. The Pullman air cleaners were tested in laboratories and showed that they actually did not clean any air that was going into the engine, which would often lead the tank to come to a complete stop. Also, even if it could at least clean the air, it would never have the capacity to clean as much air as the engine really needs. The airstream when driving wasn't helpful either. As a result, the engine didn't get the air it needed and was basically just suffocated and therefore could never really use all of its power. It's like you going for a run in a desert storm and either just breathing in sand straight into your lungs or just not breathing at all, which would lead to you not running as fast as you could, or as far, or not at all. Besides that, the fact that dirt would get stuck inside the cylinders of the engine made the engine lose even more power. The filter on the early model of the T-34 was also not good from a mechanical perspective. The welding used to assemble the filter was so rough in some areas that they actually burned holes into the metal, which caused oil to leak out. Luckily, the Soviets addressed this issue in later versions of the T-34 in which they used a better filter called the Cyclone, and then used an even better filter on the T-34-85 called the Multicyclone. The transmission on the T-34 was also tested and deemed as very poor. According to the reports, the cogs completely fell into pieces on all the cog wheels when the tank was being operated. The Americans did a chemical analysis of the cogs on the cog wheels and found that their thermal treatment was very poor and would have not in any way met the American standard. Besides the things I mentioned in detail, it was also found that the muzzle velocity of some ammunition was bad, armor quality was poor, internal equipment was poorly machined, the turret drive was also unreliable, the radios were poorly installed and protected and did not manage to establish normal communications at distances greater than 10 miles, and the side friction clutches were made of low quality steel and made life hard for the driver. Now let's talk about the numbers of actually reliable T-34 tanks. I find this the most interesting part of the whole video. The Soviets tested their newly built T-34s in April 1943 on a 330-kilometer trial and found out that only 10.1% of all T-34s which participated in that trial were able to complete it. In June 1943, this number went down to 7.7%. Up until October 1943, this number stayed below 50%, but then it suddenly went up to a whopping 78%. This number dropped again to 57% after just a month. From December 1943 to January 1944, the number went back up to 82%. During tests in February 1944, they found that 79% of tanks were able to reach 300 kilometers, and amongst those, 33% were able to reach 1,000 kilometers. P.G. Diner, who was the deputy commander of the 1st Guards Tank Army, said that in 1943 tanks would only reach 75% of their guaranteed lifespan in engine hours and mileage. In 1944, they reached 150%. It's important to add that the numbers I mentioned from the 330-kilometer trial come from a secondary source, specifically Wikipedia. On June 2, 1944, the Germans wrote an evaluation report about a Soviet T-34 they captured. Amongst other good and bad things about the T-34, they also mentioned that the tank was not suitable for long marches and high driving speeds. An average speed of 15 to 20 kilometers an hour was seen as acceptable. In regards to marches, they found that after about 30 minutes of driving, the tank must come to a stop for about 15 to 20 minutes to allow the engine to cool down. Looking at actual breakdowns of those Beutepanzer, the main issues were found in the steering gears. They found that when the tank was driving in difficult terrain, or when it was in battles where it had to change its direction many times, the steering clutch would heat up and get covered with oil. When that would happen, the clutch wouldn't function anymore and eventually make the tank unable to move. After not moving the tank for a while, the clutch would cool down. Following, one would have to clean the clutch with plenty of fuel. In contrast to the reliability of the T-34 at the beginning of the war, the life expectancy of each engine improved a lot. Numbers which were documented by the 2nd Guards Tank Army on February 11, 1945, show that a T-34 engine was expected to put out 185 to 190 hours of service before requiring any repairs. According to a decree from the Soviet State Committee of Defense from January 25, 1945, the number of service hours would improve in March 1945, going from the before-mentioned 190 hours to 250 hours of service. In some individual cases, such as in the case of the Guards Starnisha Josef Antonovich Perediri, the expected engine service life was greatly exceeded. Josef was a mechanic driver of a T-34-85 tank in the 1st Tank Battalion of the 66th Guards Tank Vapnia Raka, who managed to drive his T-34 for 2,700 kilometers and 370 engine hours without a breakdown. Another interesting thing is that all the tanks that were issued from January to February 1945 and fought with the 2nd Guards Tank Army, which were sent for repairs for mechanical reasons, exceeded their service quota. Keep in mind that those were the tanks that fought all the way into Berlin. The engine life improved so much over time that it wasn't the indicator of the tank's lifespan anymore, because there were other components such as the suspension that would break before the engine. Anyways, that was all I had to say for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you think I said anything that is not right, or you think I should have added any additional information to this video, please let me know in the comments and share your knowledge. Besides that, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.